Hi, everybody. My apologies. I had trouble actually getting into here, so I'll give it a few minutes to go live. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I'm really apologize. I'm a few minutes late. I couldn't get this thing started for some reason. I had done these YouTube lives before, but it just wasn't working for me. So anyway, I'm just gonna give it a couple of minutes. But thanks for everybody for joining, and hope you've been having a good uh, few months. It's been about a month and a bit since I lost here, so that's amazing. I love seeing you here. So I'm just going to talk about some random things, and if there are some questions, I'll try and get to them. Just about what I'm looking at, what I'm thinking about, and sort of what's happening. So one of the things I've been reading actually is it's called the expectation effect. It's quite interesting and it has some applicability in terms of mindset. And I actually think it's quite fascinating because if you change your mindset about anything really, it changes how you physically respond. So, one of the things, this is one of the things that I had always done actually, which is, try and change my mindset to something positive. So I was just thinking about this as I was coming home, and I was thinking about the fasting, for example. And the fasting, the problem is the hunger. And I'm actually in the middle of a fast. I'm in the middle of a 4-day fast. And the hunger is real. I mean, I can deal with it, but it's not always easy. So the one of the things that I've always done, which seems kind of silly, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this before, but it turns out it's a well-known sort of cognitive behavioral therapy trick, is to simply change your mindset by creating a sort of mantra. So a mantra is something you simply repeat to yourself, and when things get tough, so that you can change the way you think about it. So what I do is when I get hungry, instead of casting it in a negative way, I try to reframe that in my mind about into a positive thing. So what I do is I actually say to myself, and sometimes out loud, I say, "Burn, baby, burn," which means the fat. I'm thinking about the fat because I'm trying to think, oh, I'm hungry, but the hunger actually means that I'm actually getting somewhere in terms of shifting over my metabolism into the fat. So I do this sort of on a regular basis. When I get very hungry, I think to myself, or I say to myself, "Oh, burn, baby, burn." And that's this sort of changing the mindset from something negative to something positive. I do the same thing sometimes at the grocery store. So when I go to the grocery store and I see, all these ultra processed foods, one of the things I always think is that, you have to change the way you think about them, because ultra processed foods obviously are designed to be enticing, bright colors, boxes, and so on. But every time I pass one of these and I'm sort of tempted to get a box of whatever, I always think to myself, ooh, gross, ultra processed foods. So again, I'm changing what is a positive, what people are trying to advertise me into, from positive thing into a negative thing, simply by repeating it, something to myself, to what I want it to be. So even though hunger is not a great thing, you can reframe it as a positive thing, and you can do that really for anything, whether it's foods or whether it's other things. So that was, I thought, very, very interesting, because it's actually something I'd always done prior to that. And I was thinking about this idea in Japan, where people only eat until they're 80% full. And they have a saying for this. I think it's hari hachi bu. And I remember reading that some Dan Buettner, who does the Blue Zones, went to Okinawa, he said the older people would often at every meal they'd sit down and they say that to themselves. So again, sort of like a mantra, changing your mind, reminding yourself. And it's the same way some people say grace, again, to remember to be mindful of what you're eating and remember to be thankful for what you're eating so that you don't take it for granted. So um, oh yeah, and so I thought that was very very, very good. Another note, why it says Brad G on my YouTube channel. I got hacked. So this is the second time I've been hacked now. And I caught it in time, so they didn't take me down. But I have no idea why, but I can't get this title changed. So I change it on my YouTube studios. I've asked them and all that sort of thing. And I don't know, it still doesn't, it still says Brad G. So I'm not really sure what's happening. I don't know if it'll eventually do it. I've tried to change my name like 5 different times and it still says Brad G. So I don't know why that is. So I've left it because I just don't know how to change it. And YouTube, of course, doesn't have anybody to help you. You can email them and do live chats, but they're not spectacularly useful. So yeah, that's the whole Brad G story, unfortunately. So yeah, the other thing I was thinking about was what's coming up in terms of videos. I actually was looking at some super interesting data on fasting in the menstrual cycle, which I sometimes get asked about, but there's some really interesting data from that the company Lumen had sent me. And, I've done a couple of videos with Lumen because they have super interesting data about what your body is burning, whether it's carbs or fats. And it turns out, and I didn't know this, I don't know that many people know this, but what people burn during the menstrual cycle actually changes significantly depending on where you are in the cycle. So early in the cycle, you're burning a lot of carbs, and then you get this big spike of progesterone, and it turns more into fat burning. So this idea that there's an ideal time for fasting actually may have a lot more physiologic basis to it than initially thought. So, Megan Ramos, my colleague at the Fasting Method, always says fast during the first period of the cycle, the follicular phase, as opposed to the luteal phase, which is the second half after ovulation. And turns out she's exactly right. So what she saw on her clinical experience was that it's much easier to fast in the beginning and harder to fast in the second half of the cycle. And it's probably because in the first half of the cycle, you're sort of in this sort of carb burning state. So there's plenty of fuel. If you fast, you still got plenty of carbs, and you can certainly do that. So that's something that I thought was interesting, and I'm looking deeper into it for the next video. So that'll probably come in a couple of months. It takes me a while to do that. And then I wanted to talk about the last couple of videos that I posted, which were about the Diabetes Code Clinic. And this is actually it's a clinic that I'm actually trying to get off the ground in Toronto, which is a clinic that is sort of dedicated to reversing type 2 diabetes. And it's an in-person clinic in Toronto. It's available to the public, so anybody who's in the area can certainly join it. It does, because it's run by specialists, it does need a referral, but it's run through the provincial health plan, so it's not something that you have to pay for. When I was setting it up, everybody's like, "Oh, you have to charge for it. You have to charge for it." It's like, no, that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to do this so that everybody has availability to this. So that's where the first 2 videos came from. Actually, is the lessons from the Diabetes Code Clinic in Toronto. This is exactly the the discussions that we have for people with type 2 diabetes, trying to get them to do low carb and fasting, really focus on the diet to reverse their type 2 diabetes. So that's where the first two are. I have two more videos. There's actually a total of 6 videos. So that's why it says part 1 of 6, part 2 of 6. I'll be releasing the third and fourth sometime, and then I still have to record the last 2. So that's what's coming up. So a couple of videos on that. The fasting method I was mentioning with Megan. We've also revamped the whole program there. So the fasting method is this sort of group support for fasting. And what we've tried to do is take some of the lessons from sort of the master classes, which are more expensive, and move them into the community so that more people can benefit from that. It's a more structured program. So it's like a 12-week program. And you try to connect within the fasting method to get some help for that. So hopefully people have a chance to check that out. That's at thefastingmethod.com. So I think it's actually, we've been getting tremendous feedback. A lot of people find that they've helped a lot. I did also post a link in the notes for a webinar that I'm doing tomorrow. It's a live webinar. And you just have to register. It'll be on Zoom, and it's run by, it's called, I think, the Fasting Pros Playbook. So if you're interested, it's going to be, I think, there's some set questions, and then they're going to try and get to questions afterwards. So that's tomorrow afternoon. So let me see if we have any questions here that I can quickly answer. And thanks again for joining me here. So that's the Brad G question. Let's see. So there's a question here about fasting and CKD, and that was really, really interesting. I did a video on that a couple of weeks ago. So the first data that I had ever seen on CKD, actually. So there's diabetes. So the way I got into fasting was that I see a lot of type 2 diabetic patients, and they were developing kidney disease. So then I really wanted to use the fasting to get rid of their diabetes so they didn't develop diabetic kidney disease. So fasting to reverse type 2 diabetes was great. And then if you don't have type 2 diabetes, then you're less likely to get the kidney disease that's associated. So that's how that came about. But this is totally different. So it turns out, and this was done by the fasting mimicking diet. And I mentioned that because it's a very specific program, and it's a little bit different than how a lot of people do fasting, because it's a 5-day once a month. So it's a more extended fast, but it's not a full fast. It's something that they only do where they have about 800 calories in a day, but specially formulated to keep the nutrient sensors down so that, so it's relatively low in like protein, for example, because mTOR is one of the key modulators there. And the reason I mention that is that because a lot of studies do need some backers, and because they're selling a product, they've actually put a lot of money into the research. So I have to give them credit, because this is where the science is coming from, as opposed to a lot of these fasting studies, which are, a lot of them are just very, very small otherwise, because that's as much money as people have for it. But anyway, for CKD, for chronic kidney disease, this is not diabetic related. This is related to all these other different diseases. So IgA nephritis and I talked about polycystic kidney disease before, but other kidney diseases. So all manner of kidney diseases. And what they found was that they actually significantly improved it. And the question is why, and that's not, the study can't answer that. But it actually makes a lot of sense, because when you're decreasing those nutrient sensors, what you're doing is you're decreasing the pathways for growth, which also lead to fibrosis. So fibrosis is this sort of scar tissue that develops in the kidney with all different types of kidney diseases. So IgA nephritis and other vasculitis and all this sort of stuff. But if you're going to be able to decrease the amount of fibrosis in the kidney, potentially you can extend the life of that kidney. And that's actually the first time I've ever seen this data. So if you haven't had a chance to check out that video on fasting and CKD, that's a very interesting one to me, just because I'm a kidney specialist, but probably less applicable to some of the other things. Let me see if there's another question here. Says, when we are fasting, what does the gut microbiome feed on? That's a good question. The gut microbiome is, it changes depending on everything you eat or don't eat. So even if you don't eat, there's going to be a lot of bacteria in your GI tract. And those, of course, that's the microbiome. And we used to think is really bad, but it turns out it's really, really good, because you have a lot of good bacteria there. So when you take antibiotics or take too much antibiotics, for example, then you change the gut microbiome so that you get a lot of these sort of not so good bacteria. And that's the idea behind probiotics and so on. When you fast, what happens, of course, is that there's less food. So again, you do change the microbiome, but probably in a good way. And what do they feed on? Well, there's still epithelial lining cells. So there's sloughed off cells from, the cells of your intestine. They slough off and they come off, and there's it's sort of like the skin, right? Your skin is actually always sloughing off skin cells. Well, inside in the colon, you have the same thing. All these epithelial cells are sloughing off, and it probably feeds on that. But again, the things that are highly, highly dependent on refined sugars, for example, and starches, are probably not going to be able to survive. So you're actually going to change the gut microbiome. Everything you eat, so that's why a lot of these ultra-processed foods, a lot of the refined carbohydrates actually change your gut microbiome. Whether or not changing the gut microbiome makes any difference is a different question, but for sure, it's something that you should really think about. Let me see. Oh, thanks for all the good wishes there too. Let's see if there's any other questions that I can find here. And just reading all these comments to Brad, and I'm like, oh God, I wish I could get rid of that. Has a great comment here about from Mr. V. Karuna. He went from an A1C, hemoglobin A1C of 9.3% to 5.5% at the age of 71. And that is amazing. So the A1C, as you might know, is a sort of average blood glucose over 3 months. 9.3 is sort of considered uncontrolled, and 5.5 is considered non-diabetic. So you see the importance of the diet, and really how it's got to focus on the diet to reverse type 2 diabetes. So that's amazing. I love to hear stories like that, because type 2 diabetes sets you up for all these problems down the line. And really, you can reverse it with simple things like a low carbohydrate diet and so on. So amazing. Thanks for sharing that, for sure. It says, is it harmful if I follow intermittent fasting for 16 hours? But I always have days that I destroy everything, eating carbs, sugar, but I feel so bad and tired. This is actually a really interesting question. So it's not harmful to do the fasting. The fasting is good, but obviously it's a combination of the things that you're eating and the amount of time you spend eating it. So if you have a longer fasting period, of course, that's going to be great. However, this idea of overeating the refined foods, the carbs and sugar, it may not be simple choice. And that's one of the really interesting things that's coming out of the last couple of years, the last, say, 5 years of research on food addictions and ultra processed foods. This is super interesting, and I've been reviewing it because uh, I'm actually writing a follow up to the obesity code, hopefully sometime next year. But I'm writing it now. But the importance is that this food from that is ultra processed foods, it's completely different in that not only are we talking about foods, because foods they give us nutrients and stuff, but foods also make us feel good, right? And we know this because obviously everybody looks forward to eating and stuff. And the thing is that if you think about the foods, they're rewarding because they trigger dopamine release in the brain. What the ultra processed foods have done is that they've taken these foods that sort of boost up your dopamine and sort of amped it up to the next level in a way that's completely unnatural. So you take carbohydrates, but instead of natural carbohydrates where your body absorbs it slowly, they grind it up, they process it, and they spike it like huge. Then they mix it in various combinations and flavors so that you crave more. And the thing is that when you spike up the dopamine, it gives you this great hit of dopamine, but it's unnatural and can actually lead to addictions and cravings. So people can't stop. And that's the whole problem. It's not a problem you see with natural foods because we've evolved to deal with it, but we haven't evolved to deal with those other things. We have, and refined carbohydrates are chips and French fries and stuff. You may not be able to stop eating them, not because of willpower or whatever, but because of the addictive potential of these foods. And it's actually a real problem when they do these Yale food scales for measuring food addiction. It's about 15-16% of the population. When you look at people who are obese, it goes up to like 35%. So it's a real problem, but nobody talks about it. Everybody talks about it as if you can just simply decide to eat less. But it's like, okay, well, what if you're on heroin? Like, do I give people the advice, oh, just inject less heroin? It's like, you can't. Like, they'd love to. Just like people would love to not be able to eat those ultra processed foods. But you have to recognize that that's the problem. And if you recognize it, that's the first step to say, okay, well, maybe I just need to cut it out. Just like heroin, just like alcohol, just like tobacco. If it's an addiction, you just got to zip it. And thanks to Miami VR. He has a question here. What is the best way to curb appetite days before a water fast? Really, appetite is not something that you can actually control very well. There's a few things that you can do. Like days before, I mean, the most important thing I think is to make that decision of when you're going to do it. And I think the most important is to tell somebody so you can't back out of it. So this is what I do. I tell my wife, oh, these 3 days I'm going to fast. So, when I try to back out of it, I feel like an idiot. So then I don't, right? And it's just to keep yourself accountable, right? So that's to keep yourself going in. So how are you going to curb your appetite? Well, that's not always easy to do. What you can do for extended, there's a few things that I do for extended fast. One is that you can take things like, herbal teas and so on. But you can also take some chia seed. Remember, chia seed is mostly fiber, but it gives it a little bit of extra, texture. It forms this little gelatin and sort of fills you up a little bit, so that it feels like you're getting something, and it really has almost no calories. So that's one way. Chia seed and water, lemon and water. Some people find very helpful. Salt is also very good. The other thing that people do is, other than these sort of psychological things, so the changing your mindset in terms of hunger, which I talked about earlier, which actually, honestly, I've always done, but I thought it was stupid. But as I was reading this book, The Expectation Effect, is like, oh, there's actually a lot of research into this that's, sort of a game-changing sort of thing. And it takes like 2 seconds just to think about it. The other thing about the appetite is that you don't have, especially on the long fast, like the 5-day fast, 4-day fast, for example. I'm doing a 4-day fast. I don't always do a full water only fast anymore. I used to, but it was always a little bit difficult on day 3 and day 4. But the thing is that there's so much research now, both on the fasting mimicking diet and the 5-2 diet, that you don't have to do a full fast and you'll still be able to get most of the benefits, maybe not all, but most of the benefits of it. So what I do is on day 3 and 4, I take a little bit of something. So the bone broth was always another good way because, again, you've got a bit of that gelatin. It fills you up a little bit. But the other thing is so chia seeds, bone broth, and then I take a little bit of steamed vegetables on day 3 and 4. And it's probably like 100 calories or less. It's very little, but it's enough to sort of take that edge off and make it easier. So it's not so hard. And that, I think, is probably the best. Those are some ideas. Another question, why would a person with a former A1C of 14, which has gone down to 6.1, who has went from 210 to 170 in 3 months, still be losing weight? I can't answer specific questions related, but the thing about weight loss is that it can, it's all about the hormones, the hormonal changes, right? And mostly insulin. And that's why gaining weight is so easy, because a lot of the foods, especially these addictive ultra-processed foods, remember, are designed to sort of spike that insulin. Turns out that insulin sort of works with dopamine to increase the effect. So it's the potato chips, cookies, these French fries, mac and cheese, these comfort foods that give you this quick hit of dopamine, that huge spike in insulin actually makes it even more rewarding. So when you start to turn it the other way, then you actually start to lose the weight, and it might be able to continue. So the fasting is great for that, and also that other thing. Question here for Kim L. Your clinic in Toronto closed. Actually, it did close. So it was a few. We've had a few. So years ago, Megan Ramos and I did a clinic. That was at the back of our office. We worked together in the office, and we were able to help a lot of people with the fasting and so on. But then she moved to California, so we had to take that online, and that became the fasting method. So then I tried to set it up with a different group of doctors. It was called the Toronto Metabolic Clinic, and that was sort of focused. But then sort of COVID hit, the whole thing sort of was just hanging on by a thread, and then the person who organized it also moved. So that had to close down as well. So now I'm to my third sort of go at it, which is I'm calling it the Diabetes Code Clinic, which is in Toronto. And it's, again, same thing, run by specialists, but this is actually a little bit more focused on reversal and remission of type 2 diabetes. So it's not just for weight. You have to have diabetes, because I've always tried to focus on type 2 diabetes because it's been because those people are at much higher risk of health problems like kidney problems, which is what's sort of close to me. So I've always tried to, try to do that. And the thing is that it does require a referral from your family physician to go, because it's a specialist. So in Toronto, you have to have a specialist to do that. And I think that we're going to put up a website. Right now it's just in the startup phase. As I said, the first 2 educational sessions are posted to YouTube. So, but what we do is we have people in a group, because I believe strongly that being in a group setting helps everybody. Like when everybody's there together helping each other, it's much more powerful. You get this peer support that is very valuable. People from 8 years ago are still talking to me. Oh, remember that clinic you did with Megan? They loved it because they got together and got help. So that was the whole. So I'm starting up again. I don't have the web page up yet because I'm still sort of working through it. We've got all our materials done. If once we do have the web page up, we'll let you know. But it just needs a referral from your family physician, and it's focused on type 2 diabetes remission. Question here from David Hartley. Thanks so much. He said, did you see the recent Peter Attia podcast with Dr. DeFranzo? What do we think about lactose and a GLP-1 for T2D? Unfortunately, I didn't. I haven't gotten to that podcast yet. Lactose is a medication that increases the insulin effect, and it was very popular. I think about 15 years ago. There was two drugs, Avandia and Actos, and they're heavily marketed. They're billion-dollar drugs. Turned out that the problem with type 2 diabetes is that insulin levels are too high. Insulin is going to move the glucose from your blood into your body, where your body then takes it and turns it into fat. So it's a drug like insulin because it increases insulin effect that is pretty bad because it takes that sugar from your blood and turns it into body fat and you gain weight. As you gain weight, your diabetes gets worse, then you need more medications. So it sort of lost popularity. Turns out the Avandia was causing a lot of heart attacks, so they pulled it from the market. A million lawsuits associated. Actos didn't have the same problems, but sort of lost steam about 15 years ago, I'd say. So Actos is not something I don't think I've even seen a single patient on Actos in the last 5 years in my office. So I don't the problem is too much insulin. Why would I want to give a drug that increases that effect? Answer, I don't. Most people I see need to lose weight. Why would I give Actos, which makes you gain weight? I don't, right? GLP-1 is different. GLP-1 increases the satiety effect, makes you a little bit nauseated, makes you not want to eat. So the overall effect on insulin is to go down, which is great. So I think it's got a good role to play for all those sorts of things. But the thing is that, I don't see why you'd want to add Actos. If you have to for the blood glucose, sure, but I don't really see any good reason why. Question from Brandon. Hi, can insulin levels be tested at home like blood glucose? If so, how? Unfortunately, you can't. So I know one group of people is actually trying to look at it. They're trying to find, try and get that sense, but it's really the overall sort of effect of the insulin. So rather than the insulin itself, you get the insulin levels are going to go up and down very, minute to minute. So in the clinic, you can measure a fasting insulin. And I do all the time, actually, but there's a different one called the fasting C-peptide or just a regular C-peptide, which is a reflection of the insulin levels, but it doesn't fluctuate up and down as much. So if I did my insulin level now, it'd be low. If I ate, it'd be high. So it changes so much. So that's why it's not as useful as you might think. And one other question here. Let's see. Why do you never mention plant-based diets? That's a good question, because the issue with plant-based diets is not that I'm against it. I actually think that they're fine, but there's nothing inherently healthy about eating a plant-based diet. So to me, it's a division that makes no sense. That is to say, if you eat a plant-based diet and you're eating pizza, French fries, cookies, and donuts, well, that's not healthy in any way. Super high in refined carbohydrates, super processed, highly addictive. It's a plant-based diet, but it sucks. It sucks. I know it sucks. So why make that distinction? On the other hand, you can eat a plant-based diet that's whole vegetables, grains and beans and tofu. And that's pretty healthy. So I'm not against plant-based diets, but the division of eating plants and eating animals doesn't make it healthy or not healthy. So to me, it's just useless as a classification. It's useful to say classify foods as ultra-processed or non-ultra-processed because natural foods, I think, are very good. It's useful to say natural fats versus processed fats like seed oils. I don't like seed oils and I like processed fats, unprocessed fats. It's useful to say refined carbohydrates because you're trying to avoid that. So that's why I don't really talk about plant-based diet so much, because I don't find that distinction to be useful. I mean, I used to think, I remember ages ago when I was in high school, we had this vegetarian. He was Indian and he's vegetarian. I remember thinking he was quite chubby, and I used to think, and now that I look back, he used to eat a lot of French fries from the cafeteria because that's what he could eat. Obviously, eating a lot of French fries not good for you, and it can cause a lot of weight gain. But I remember thinking, why is he so overweight? Because he's a vegetarian. That doesn't make any sense to me. I remember thinking this, and this is 20 years ago. But of course, it's sort of obvious to me now. He's eating highly refined foods, deep fried in seed oil, which is bad. A lot of refined carbohydrates, which is going to stimulate insulin. Insulin is going to cause weight gain. One other question here from Chris. Why cold during 20-hour plus fast mechanistically? Sorry, I'm not sure what the question is. I'm not sure if this is about cold immersion. I mean, that's an interesting topic. I don't know that much about it, but I do have actually a lot of friends. I think they're watching Huberman or something, but who actually do it. They love it. So David Ludwig, who's a PhD, he used to be at Harvard. He's at the University of Copenhagen now. He started doing it. I've seen him post it on Instagram and so on, and he loves it. So, is there something about the cold immersion that's, people enjoy? Could be. There's also the worry, the benefit of potentially browning the white fat, which is where you change the white fat into brown fat, which is very active and generates heat. So, very interesting data there. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining me. I'm going to apologize for being late. Hopefully, I'll get the hang of what I'm doing here. So just signing out here, Brad G. All right, take care, guys.